Greetings, fellow treasure hunters. Jacob Wile here.
And Tiki, too.
And welcome back to Discovering DuckTales. In addition to the reboot that we're now covering, we here So You Want to Be an Imagineer and also dusting off and unearthing the original series in this vlog. Not ponytails or cottontails. No, it's DuckTales.
A woohoo!
And tonight we have The Lost Crown of Genghis Khan.
Yeah, that's right, Jacob. That's right. So, really excited to be back talking about more DuckTales, folks. Of course, the original show has, we've kind of been taking a hiatus from it. A lot of stuff, we started off on the right foot in terms of scheduling, but it sort of got away from us, especially when we realized there was, no physical way to get, to get our original goal done of covering every original DuckTales episode before the new show came out. But you know what, Jacob? We figured this is a good way to kind of cover DuckTales in the off season of the 2017 show. So,
Well, that's on hiatus.
Yeah, right. So I feel like that's a good kind of balance there. And I do think it's a really interesting discussion to kind of be covering both shows because I feel like this episode is a really, the timing is pretty interesting how this episode sort of, it mirrors the Mount Everest episode, which is the latest episode of DuckTales that we saw, and in my opinion, my personal favorite of the new DuckTales episodes.
Yeah, that's I wanted to point that out before, but I kind of slipped my mind. It's like both of them involve basically the Himalayas and searching for something in the Himalayas.
So of course we covered the DuckTales movie on a Talking Mr. Banks. So folks, I'll try and make a point of providing a link to that podcast if you guys want to check that out. I was very happy about how that turned out. But so I got to admit, Dragon, the Lost Crown of Genghis Khan, not one of the better DuckTales episodes.
Probably not.
The Mount Everest episode was. I feel like this is an interesting kind of compare and contrast here, though, where a lot of stuff that the Mount Everest episode does right, this kind of gets wrong.
Most likely. I mean, let's get into dissect.
So, I don't want to call this a bad episode or anything because I feel like it's a bit of a whiplash to go from the 2017 series back into this one. Although we did get a little bit of an adjustment period watching the movie again, but this is episodic old school DuckTales, and I mean, this is really old school. So going back to, I will say it was great to get Alan Young and Russi Taylor and everything,
Terrence McGovern.
Yeah, of course. That was all great. It was all kind of like getting the old band back together in a way.
Yeah.
But having said that, we're getting the band back together for an episode that, not, it wasn't terrible by any stretch. I feel like it's just kind of standard DuckTales.
Yeah, it's a very contained adventure.
It is. It's got some decent parts to it. I like the active role that Launchpad takes in it. I think Launchpad is probably my favorite part of the story.
He usually, when his goal doesn't. And this time the crash is actually accidental on his part. It's he wasn't. I mean, not that he ever tries to, but he was actually trying to prevent a crash this time. It's and he's actually took an active role in trying to protect the kids and make sure they were okay and all that.
I like how concerned he was about Scrooge towards the beginning when Scrooge is caught in the blizzard.
Yeah, it's it should he actually does care about these people.
I mean, not that didn't show that he cared, but I feel like a lot of the time with Launchpad, both in the new show and in this show, he's just kind of bumbling around on a side story.
Yeah, here's I do like how he was part of the main action. He said that he wasn't just there just to be there.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things I kind of liked about this episode is how it set up the the Duckburg Explorer Society.
Yeah, and I don't think they're ever seen ever again.
Well, you know what? It's an interesting idea.
It is, and the fact that apparently all the businesses in Duckburg isn't the only thing that Scrooge has a monopoly on.
God. But that calls directly back to Scrooge's comic book origins. And I feel like that one painting of Scrooge in the treasure hunter's outfit, like, that could be like a nice comic book nod right there.
This, speaking of comics, this episode is very loosely, mind you, but still based on a story of a comic book story.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
It's loosely based, of course, but it's still there.
So I feel like that imagery with Scrooge in the treasure hunter's outfit, that's definitely,
most likely
pretty intentional.
Yeah, most likely an intentional homage to the original story, because Carl Barks actually is credited in this episode as the person who wrote the story, basically.
I like how we see the flashback of Genghis Khan, and it's Pete.
Yeah, it's basically this show's version of Pete.
Dragon, it's weird. Like, much in the same way that Treasure of the Lost Lamp is kind of like a pre-Atlantis, this is almost kind of like, at least this flashback is sort of like a weird, like, DuckTales version of Mulan in a way.
Atlantis? Do you mean Aladdin?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I mean Aladdin. Yeah, my bad.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, Aladdin. And this one kind of does remind me of Mulan. Technically, Genghis Khan is like kind of similar to the Huns in a way. Not exactly a Hun. He's a Mongol, but still, it's kind of interesting to see the actual real life person shown in this kind of context.
So here's one thing that bugs me about the movie, about this episode, is I feel like this is kind of becoming a standard with DuckTales episodes that don't center around the main villains like Magica or Flintheart. This villain kind of sucks.
Like, what's his name again?
Sarkis? More like Suckus.
But seriously, what's this guy's name again?
Sir Guy Standforth.
All right. At least Sarkis had somewhat of an interesting sounding name. At least he had that. At least he has that going for him.
This episode kind of reminds me of the same disappointment I felt with M. Night Shyamalan's The Village, where they're building up this snow creature, right? And we see like these vague shots of his claw and everything. And to me, it looks really cool. Like, it kind of looks like the abominable snowman from the Matterhorn. You know what I mean? Like, I like the blue skin and everything. But then we find out that it's actually just this Sir Guy Standforth guy. And the actual Yeti is not nearly as cool.
And is actually an abominable snow woman.
And this kind of basically plays to the main complaint I have about this episode is the Webby storyline. And Jacob, I really feel like this is where the episode just kind of falls off the cliff. Like, the first half of the episode isn't bad. The first half of the episode has a lot of good launchpad stuff. It's got some good adventure. But once it just becomes like, look how cute she is, Uncle Scrooge. It's just like, oh, Jesus Christ. You see, like, this is why we couldn't have nice things back in the 80s. Honestly, Jacob, that is why I feel like talking about this show while we're talking about DuckTales 2017 is going to be an interesting development going forward. Like, we're going to try and do at least one of these a week. That's kind of going to be the goal. So I'm sure we'll crack out a lot of these between the DuckTales episodes. But, since we do have a solid foundation for what 2017 is like, we already know, let's face it, is, love or hate the Mabel Pines clone version of Webby that we kind of get in 2017. Like, it's such a better improvement over this.
I'm not going to explicitly deny that outright. You know what I mean. I'm not going to deny what you said.
I don't know. It's
in other words, I'm trying to say I agree with you.
Jacob, I feel like this whole subplot is kind of like, it's almost kind of like a predecessor to what we're building up to with the dreaded Bubba Duck storyline.
Let's not mention that right now.
Well, I'm just saying, like, Bubba Duck is that's like a whole story of Webby basically being like, oh, isn't he cute?
Like I said, We do not speak of that.
We do not speak of Bubba Duck.
There's a reason he was basically ridden out.
God.
And replaced with Gizmo Duck, basically.
It was much cooler.
Yeah. He's like another one of the show's original improvements later on that actually paid off.
What if they made Bubba Duck like the most badass character in DuckTales 2017?
He was more helpful in the video game than he was in the actual show.
Right.
Like even in remastered, he was more useful. But it would be pretty interesting to see this. I mean, we already know Gizmo Duck's returning for the new series.
Oh yeah. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they take a crack at Bubba Duck. It's just, I feel like Bubba Duck is one of those, like, you know, he is for all intents and purposes the Jar Jar of DuckTales.
What I would like to see is like it's like the new. I mean, we're kind of veering off subject.
Yeah,
but
we are.
But what I really want to see, one thing that'd be pretty funny and kind of like a jab at it is like, well, because like they're not, they're not shy about taking jabs at the original series with the whole Webby dolls being shot with an arrow. I mean, so what I would be surprised, like they had a caveman and a Stegosaurus fossil at a cave duck and Stegosaurus fossil at a museum, and Gizmo Duck accidentally blasts it.
Oh God, that'd be great. That'd be great.
Like, whoops. Well, I guess they're not going
to. It kind of be like the DuckTales equivalent of like the Spinosaurus skeleton in Jurassic World.
It's like take that. It's like well, I hope nobody misses that.
Or what if it's literally just like a fossil of Bubba, like a Han Solo carbonite style fossil, just like done. He's dead.
That'd be funny.
All right, but seriously, getting back to this episode, I mean, like I said, once we get to the whole like the treasure thing and the, like the she Yeti or whatever you want to call her, it's
kind of where they're getting more fun of the potential discussions of something completely unrelated.
Yeah, I mean, this is the point where the episode is just sort of like, yeah, all right, this is standard like 80s cartoon fare. And honestly, Jacob, that's kind of like the fun of talking about a show like DuckTales, where to me, DuckTales has always been like we've already talked about the peak of DuckTales, right? Like by doing the movie when we did it, like the peak is like the best is behind us.
Well, and there's plenty of good episodes lay ahead though too.
Oh, I'm sure there are, but I'm just saying, like, DuckTales in general, it's not a show that really, like, it's not something like early Simpsons, where early Simpsons, you can pick out a ton of episodes individually and just hold them on a pedestal. Like, I feel like DuckTales is one of those shows where, like, in a way, it is very kind of like, it's a weird mix of, it's obviously a quality show because it's like Disney's first foray into animated programming. They spent a lot of time and effort into it. But I feel like the kind of like the structure of cartoons from back in that day, like the non-serialization, the very basic characters, the status quo never changing. Like that's all stuff that has just gotten so significantly better. And it's like, it's one of those things I always point to when people say that cartoons are getting worse. I'm like, well, maybe certain networks are getting worse, but I feel like animation in general is only getting stronger, at least the storytelling element of animation. Because sure, the original DuckTales is super nostalgic, but like that's a challenge of talking about it, is that it simply doesn't have the deep layers that, that a modern cartoon is going to have.
I mean, no, not every modern cartoon needs to have deep layers too. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still appreciate the cartoons nowadays that even like don't even bother with like the overarching plot, just want to be a silly, fun cartoon.
I feel like Milo Murphy is a good example of that.
I mean, even they have a bit of an ongoing story, but it's not like the biggest focus. It's like, how can we tell this interesting and funny story in this kind of way?
Sure, but Milo Murphy is a good example of like, it's a show where it's very humor based, and while there is technically a story to it, like it's very episodic in a way.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, don't get me wrong. I mean, like I like shows with like deep keep going plots and complex villains and stuff like that, and complex characters. Like but then on the same token, I also like the ones that are just like silly, have fun and take advantage of the medium.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's just like sometimes it's just good to have fun with it. And honestly, I just think that's something that's been lost with a lot of this, like with the focus on episodic cartoons and like ongoing dramatic storylines.
Yeah, you do raise a good point, Jacob. You do raise a really good point. I'll give you that much.
I mean, don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. There's still some out there. It's just like they're not as prominent or as like they're not getting as much attention as they used to.
Honestly, I feel like the big one to point to right now is the Loud House.
I mean, that's one that's like still getting a lot of acclaim and still like not necessarily having an ongoing story. Which, like I said, that's one reason why I really like that show.
Right. Like I haven't really kept up with the Loud House, but I've liked what I've seen of it.
It's a great show. I mean, I don't know how it'll change with Chris Savino being gone, but
yeah, well, let's not talk about that. Let's not drag the conversation down.
Yeah, let's not. But it's kind of funny how we're like gleaming all kinds of interesting things from this episode without really talking about the episode itself.
Well, that's because there's not much to talk about with the episode. I mean, what's there to say? They go up into the mountains. Launchpad's a good support system. Scrooge is kind of a greedy asshole, but he doesn't necessarily have the layers that he does in the Mount Everest episode.
And the whole gold thing never really went anywhere either.
No, it doesn't. That's another thing that bothers me. It's an episode of DuckTales where like I feel like the treasure element is almost kind of like an afterthought. Like, yeah, they're after the crown, but then they find this whole treasure and it's just like, oh, okay, sweet.
And never brought up again.
Yeah, so I don't know, but Jacob, let me just hold on. Let me just kind of like this episode was big enough that they actually gave it a home video release. Hold on, let me,
Yep.
So it's like, I don't know, that kind of blows me away a little bit. I mean, it doesn't necessarily blow me away because I'm sure there were a lot of home video releases of different DuckTales episodes. I remember there were a whole bunch of them in the video store, but I don't know. It's just, to me, this episode is honestly kind of like, it starts out well enough with, with the Pete flashback and then the adventure elements, but it definitely, it's not one of the stronger ones that we've talked about so far.
Not really.
So,
I mean, I really just have like a general discussion on cartoons in general, and maybe how we just did a future of it, I do a future of animation in a way.
We'll see. I
need to do something like that.
Certainly. Well, actually, that's kind of what I was. Jacob, if you want to do that, I feel like the Jungle Movie would be a good place to do that. That's kind of what I was pitching for the Jungle Movie podcast to begin with.
Well, let's think about it.
All right.
But
yeah, like I said, I feel like this episode is just kind of like a good way to kind of deconstruct the differences in the 2017 series where, the 2017 series, since it's so young, you can't necessarily call it better than the original DuckTales for the legacy that the original DuckTales has. But
I mean, certain aspects of it are better. I know what are better. I mean, we can't really say which, like I said, but
I will say, Jacob, it was very nice to go back to the original kind of like classic Disney hand-drawn style.
Yeah.
Not that I dislike the style of 2017, but it was just like, just visually, it was very refreshing to return to the more traditional roots.
Yeah, how even though technically the new series is actually closer to the original style of the comic books. It's a weird feeling.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's just a very surreal kind of experience in general. You know what I mean? Like being so engrossed in the 2017 series. I don't think we've really talked about DuckTales the series since like March, maybe?
Probably not. It's just like jumping in.
We did talk about the movie, but like I said, the movie is almost, the movie is like the pinnacle of DuckTales. Like it's not the series, it's, of course, it being the movie, it's bigger than the series. It's like it's the series prime, much like how Mask of the Phantasm, again, written by the same guy, is kind of the prime of Batman the Animated Series.
It's really interesting to see that. The 2017 series. I was gonna say something interesting, but I kind of forgot what I was gonna say. It's like, it'd be interesting to see how it goes further from here. To see like the parallels. Like, this couldn't like now I remember it's like, and in many ways, this new series couldn't is very different than this one. Like in many ways.
Yeah, I would say one of the big differences is that the new one very much focuses a lot on, while I feel like the old one has elements of kind of like the kids being kids, the new one focuses more on that, like the individual characteristics.
I see that.
I feel like the new series sort of saves the adventure episodes. And I feel like for that reason, the adventure episodes of the new series sort of feel more special in a way. Whereas I feel like the original DuckTales, it's kind of like just a new adventure every week. And so it's just a matter of how well is it executed. You know what I mean? Like how good's the writing on each particular episode? Like, how good's the villain, etc. Whereas 2017, there's a lot more breathing room to play around with the structure. And when we do get something that's more in line with a traditional adventure episode, like the Mount Everest episode, it's usually paired with some good character stuff too.
Definitely.
All right. Well, Jacob, I feel like that's about it. I feel like we're kind of scratching, just kind of struggling to talk about stuff with this episode in general. So, like I said, folks, not a bad episode, just kind of like an interesting episode to start out with, to kind of reboot Discovering DuckTales on. Just because like Mount Everest is very similar to this episode, and it just kind of like shines a light on how 2017 is in many ways an improvement. So, all right, Jacob, do we have an outro for this?
Actually, we do.
Go ahead.
Well, folks, tonight's adventure has come to an end. But be sure to join us in the future. Until next time on Discovering DuckTales.
A woohoo! Sarkis, more like suck it.